It was a quiet morning in a small American town. The sun was rising, and the streets were slowly filling with people. Shops were opening, children were going to school. Everything looked normal. On the corner of Main Street, an old black man sat alone on a park bench. His name was James Carter. His jacket was old. His shoes were dusty. He held a wooden cane and a small black and white photo in his hand. No one really noticed him, and those who didn't care. Some people said he was homeless. Others said he was crazy. But no one knew his story. No one ever asked. Every day, James sat on that same bench at the same time. He never begged. He never spoke much. He just watched people pass by. He smiled at children. He nodded at strangers. But most just ignored him, except the local cops. They noticed him, but not in a good way. 3 officers from the town's police force often walked that street. One of them, Officer Mike, was always loud and rude. He didn't like James. He called him names. He laughed at his old military jacket. "Hey, General," Mike shouted one day, pointing at James. "Where's your army now? You who's your war, old man?" The other officers laughed. James didn't say a word. He looked at them calmly, then looked away. Another day, Officer Mike kicked James's cane, making it fall to the ground. "Oops," he said, smirking. "Must have slipped, soldier." James slowly bent down, picked up the cane, and sat back down. Still, he didn't say anything. But one day, after Mike threw a crumpled soda can at him, James finally spoke. "You've made a big mistake, son," he said in a calm, deep voice. Mike stopped laughing. His smile faded for a second. But then he laughed again. "Oh, really? And what mistake is that, Grandpa?" James looked at him. His eyes were sharp, cold, and full of something powerful. "Pain, experience, history. You'll see," James said quietly. The other 2 officers looked at each other. For the first time, they felt something strange, a feeling they couldn't explain. James wasn't just another old man. There was something about him, something hidden. Later that day, at the police station, the officers joked about James again. But one young rookie officer, David, didn't laugh. He was new to the job. He had seen James every morning. He noticed something the others didn't. James always wore the same jacket. But on the jacket's shoulder, there was an old army patch. It was faded, almost invisible. But David had seen that patch before, in a military museum. It belonged to a secret special unit that fought in wars long ago. Curious, David decided to check James's name in the system. Nothing. No records. No home address. No phone number. No medical history. No military ID. Just one red note on the screen. Classified. Pentagon ACS required. David stared at the screen, confused. Why would a man like James be classified by the Pentagon? He called a senior officer to take a look, but when they returned to the computer, the file was gone. Deleted, like it never existed. That night, James didn't show up on the bench. The next morning, still no sign. People began to notice. Some even asked, "Where's the old guy?" But no one had answers. Later that evening, a woman who ran a bakery nearby told someone she saw James get into a black SUV late at night. No license plate, dark windows. "He didn't say a word," she said. "He just got in and drove away." Back at the police station, Officer Mike received a strange phone call. The voice on the other end was cold and firm. "This is the United States Department of Defense. Do not approach Mr. James Carter again. You are being monitored." The call ended before Mike could respond. His hands began to shake. Who was this man, they mocked? Why was the Pentagon calling? In the silence of the night, back in the park, the bench sat empty for the first time in years. But under it, someone had placed a folded American flag and a single medal shining in the moonlight. The bench stayed empty for 3 days. People who passed by started to notice. It felt strange, like something was missing from the town. Even the bakery lady, who never spoke much, asked her customers, "Have you seen that old man? The one with the cane?" Nobody had. The weather changed. Cold winds began to blow. But the park still felt quiet. Too quiet. At the police station, Officer David couldn't stop thinking about James Carter. He remembered the army patch, the classified file, the warning call from the Pentagon. Everything felt unreal, like a story from a movie. David was different from the other officers. He didn't like how they treated James. He had seen war veterans before. His own grandfather had served in Vietnam. He knew respect was earned, not demanded. David went back to the system, hoping to find the file again, but it was completely wiped. No trace, just empty fields. He tried searching military records. He searched newspapers, hospital data, army medals, anything connected to James Carter. Nothing. It was like James didn't exist. No past, no address, no family. Just a name and a photo in David's memory, an old man holding a black and white picture with silent eyes. One night, David sat at home, staring at his laptop. He remembered something strange James once said. "You've made a big mistake, son." The words echoed in his mind. What mistake? Suddenly, David had an idea. He reached out to an old friend who worked in cybersecurity. He sent him a message. "Can you trace anything on a person named James Carter? Former military. Wears a faded patch. Might be Black Ops." A few hours passed. Then, the reply came. "Dude, are you serious? That name is on a restricted list. Like, Pentagon eyes-only level. I just tried to open it and got blocked out." David's heart started beating faster. This was real. James Carter was someone important, someone hidden. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away, at the Pentagon, a high-level officer sat in a dark room, holding a file. It was old, yellowed at the edges, stamped with a red word, "Top Secret." Inside the file was a picture of a young black soldier, sharp eyes, strong build, wearing the same patch David saw on James's jacket. His name, James Carter, Coast Unit Bravo. Next to the photo was a mission report. Operation Silence Flame. Year, 1984. Location, unknown. Status, all members presumed dead. The officer picked up a phone. "He's been found," he said. "He's alive." There was silence on the other end. Then a slow reply. "Does he remember everything?" The officer answered, "We believe he does." Back in the town, Officer Mike was nervous. Since that strange call, he couldn't sleep well. He kept hearing James's voice in his head. He tried to laugh it off with his fellow officers, but something had changed. The way people looked at him was different now. Even the bakery lady stopped smiling at him. Then, one morning, a letter arrived at the station. It had no return address, just the word "for him" written in bold. Mike opened it. Inside was a single photo. It was James, years younger, standing beside a group of soldiers, all smiling, all wearing medals. And standing next to James was Mike's father. Mike stared at the photo in shock. He dropped it. His father had died in the war. Mike had never seen this photo before. Taped to the back was a note. "He saved your father's life. Twice. You mocked the wrong man." That same day, a black SUV entered the town again. It parked near the old park bench. People looked from their windows, confused. A tall man in a military uniform stepped out. He looked around, then placed something on the bench, a fresh bouquet of flowers and a small metal box. Then he walked back to the SUV and left. Officer David, watching from a distance, rushed to the bench. He opened the metal box. Inside was a note. "I will return. JC." Under it was a military medal, Medal of Honor. David had tears in his eyes. This man they all ignored was a national hero. Later that night, deep inside a Pentagon base, James Carter sat at a long table. His eyes were focused. His cane rested beside him. Across from him sat high-ranking generals. "We owe you an apology, James," one of them said. James didn't smile. He just nodded. "You disappeared after Operation Silence Flame. We thought you were gone." "I was," James said softly, "but not forgotten." Another general spoke. "The local police, they'll be handled." "We've already made the call." James didn't reply. He looked down at the photo he always carried, a black and white picture of his old unit. So many faces, so many lost. "You know," he said, "they didn't mock me because I was weak. They mocked me because they didn't know who I was." The room went silent. Then James stood. "I'm going back," he said. "One last thing to do." Back in town, the next morning, the bench was no longer empty. James Carter sat there once again. But this time, things were different. People stopped. People looked. And this time, they remembered. The bakery lady brought him a cup of coffee. A child waved. A young man saluted him. And James smiled for the first time in a long time. But the story was far from over. Because now, the world would learn the truth. Far from the quiet town where James Carter once sat alone on a park bench, powerful people were starting to whisper his name again. Inside the Pentagon, a building filled with secrets, 4 men in suits sat around a long glass table. Thick files lay in front of them. The room was silent except for the steady ticking of the wall clock. A general with silver hair opened a file stamped "Top Secret." Inside was a photo of a young soldier, James Carter, strong, focused, alive. "This man is a ghost," the general said. "We declared him dead 41 years ago." Another man, wearing glasses, leaned forward. "We didn't declare him dead. We made him disappear." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. James Carter wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something much bigger. A unit the world didn't know existed. Ghost Unit Bravo. A team of soldiers so skilled, so secret, even their families didn't know where they went. They completed missions that were never written in history books. Missions so dangerous, they weren't supposed to come back. And one day, they didn't. In 1984, James and his team were sent on Operation Silence Flame. It was deep in foreign territory. What happened there was never shared with the public. Only one message came back. All units lost. Mission failed. No survivors. But that message was a lie. Inside a dark room, far from the public eye, James Carter sat again with the generals who once gave him orders. They looked older. He looked tired. One of them stood up. "James, we thought you were gone." "I was," James replied, "but I never forgot." They handed him a thick folder. Inside were names, photos, maps, files from Operation Silence Flame, files James had never seen. "I want the truth," James said. "Everything." The general nodded slowly. "You deserve it." As James read through the pages, old memories came rushing back. Flashback, year 1984. The jungle was burning. The air was full of smoke. His team was scattered, wounded, dying. They had been sent in to stop a chemical weapon test, but someone betrayed them. The mission was a setup. James carried his best friend, Marcus, on his back for miles. Bullets flew past them. He didn't stop. In the end, only James survived. He was badly injured, unconscious for weeks. A local village saved him, but when he tried to contact base, no one answered. When he found a radio, he heard the news. James Carter and Ghost Unit Bravo, all dead. That was the day he died to the world, back to the present. As James closed the file, his eyes were wet. "They left us to die," he whispered. "They had to," the general said. "If the mission was exposed, it would have caused global war. You know that." James looked at him sharply. "And what about honor? What about truth? You buried us like we never existed." There was no reply. James stood up. His cane tapped against the floor. "I want something from you," he said. The room tensed. "I want my team's names remembered. I want their families to know they were heroes." One of the younger officers nodded. "We can do that. Publicly." "No," James replied. "Not yet. But their families deserve peace. And I want one more thing." The general asked, "What's that?" James looked him straight in the eye. "I want a visit to the police department in that small town." Back in the town, Officer David sat at his desk, looking at the photo James left behind, the one with Mike's father in it. The connection was clear now. David confronted Officer Mike in the break room. "That old man, he saved your dad's life. Twice." Mike's face went pale. "What?" he asked. David showed him the photo. "Your father served with James. He died on a mission. James survived." Mike took the photo in shaking hands. For a long time, he said nothing. "I mocked a man who risked his life for my own blood," he whispered. David nodded. "You need to make this right." That same afternoon, a sleek black SUV entered the town again. It parked directly in front of the police station. James Carter stepped out, wearing his same old jacket, but this time clean and pressed, his medals pinned proudly to his chest. The station went silent. Officers stood still. Phones stopped ringing. Even Mike stood frozen. James walked in slowly, tapping his cane. He walked right up to Mike. "I saved your father," James said calmly. "He was brave, loyal. He died with honor." Mike couldn't look him in the eye. "I'm sorry," he finally said, "for everything." James didn't speak for a moment. Then he placed something on Mike's desk, a folded American flag and a photo of Mike's father. "He wanted you to have this, he told me, before he died." Mike broke down in tears. James turned and walked out of the station. Later that evening, news began to spread. People were talking, not just in the town, but across the country. The war hero who returned from the dead, mocked by police, respected by the nation. Pentagon confirms James Carter, real, alive, decorated. The whispers in Washington had become headlines. But James didn't care about fame. He only wanted one thing: peace. That night, he sat on his bench again. The same park, the same wind. But this time, he wasn't alone. People came. They brought flowers. Children asked for photos. Veterans saluted him. And still, James said very little. He simply looked up at the sky and whispered, "They remember now." The sun was setting over the town. The sky was painted in soft orange and gold. For years, no one noticed the old man on the bench. But now, people came just to see him. James Carter had become a name again, not just in the town, but across the country. News vans lined the streets. Reporters waited outside the park, cameras in hand. Veterans arrived, some traveling from other states. They stood quietly, hats in hand, saluting James from a distance. But James didn't care for the attention. He still wore the same jacket, still sat on the same bench, and he still carried that black and white photo in his hand. Only now, people looked at him with respect. In Washington, high-level officials met again. "We've reopened Ghost Unit Bravo's case," one man said. "The families have been notified," said another. James's request was being honored. At last, the names of his lost brothers-in-arms would be remembered. But the whispers weren't over. Some officials wanted more. What if James speaks publicly? He knows missions that were never declassified. What if he tells the world what really happened? A silence filled the room. "We can't stop him," the general said, "but maybe we can guide him." Back in the town, something special was being planned. The mayor called for a day of honor to recognize James Carter. A stage was set up in the park. Chairs were arranged. Flags were raised. The whole town was invited. James didn't ask for this. He didn't expect it. But when he was told, he simply said, "If it helps people remember them, I'll go." The day came. Hundreds of people gathered in the park. Some brought flowers. Others brought signs. "Thank you, James. You are our hero. We see you now." The mayor stepped forward. "For years, we passed him without knowing who he was. We failed to see the hero among us. But today, we say it proudly. Welcome home, Sergeant James Carter." The crowd clapped. Many had tears in their eyes. James walked slowly to the microphone. His cane tapped the wood stage with each step. He stood silently for a moment, looking at the crowd. Then he spoke. "I'm not used to this," James began. "For a long time, I lived in silence. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I was part of something called Ghost Unit Bravo. We did things no one could talk about. We went places maps didn't show. We lost people whose names never made it to stone. He held up the black and white photo. These were my brothers. They died for this country, for peace, for all of you. His voice was calm, but full of emotion. I never wanted fame. I never wanted attention. But I did want something. He paused. I wanted them to be remembered. That's all. The crowd stayed quiet. James looked down at a little girl sitting near the front row. My job was to make the world safer for your future. He gave a soft smile. Now, I finally feel like I've come home. The applause was long. The cheers were loud. But James stepped down quietly, like he always did. Later that evening, James visited a nearby cemetery. He walked slowly between the rows of white headstones. At one corner, there was a new memorial, a stone wall with 7 names. Marcus Taylor, Ely Grant, Samuel Knox, Leon Rivers, Thomas Delgado, Eric Holt, James Carter, marked, returned. He placed a single rose beneath the wall. They can rest now, he whispered. Flashback, Ghost Unit days. It was cold. Rain poured heavily. James and Marcus sat under a tree, catching their breath. You think we'll make it back? Marcus asked. James smiled slightly. We always do. Marcus laughed. If I don't, tell my mom I love her. James looked at him. You'll tell her yourself. But deep inside, he wasn't sure. They both knew the mission was dangerous, but they went anyway. That's what soldiers did. Back to the present. That night, James sat on his bench again. The park was quiet. The people had gone home. But one man stayed. Officer Mike. He walked slowly to the bench and sat beside James. I wanted to say thank you, Mike said. James nodded but didn't reply. Mike took a deep breath. You saved my father. I grew up thinking he died alone. But now, I know he didn't. James looked at him. He was brave, James said. He never gave up. I wish I had known, Mike whispered. I would have treated you better. James gave a small smile. Sometimes we see people, but we don't really see them. Mike nodded. I see you now. They sat in silence as the stars filled the sky. Meanwhile, deep in Washington, a folder was passed across a desk. A voice spoke. There's more to James Carter. He's not just a hero. He's a living file of classified memory. Some want to protect him. Others may want to silence him. The man holding the file closed it slowly. Keep watching him, he said. He's not finished yet. Back in the town, James lay in bed, looking at the ceiling. For decades, he carried pain. Now, he carried peace. But deep inside, something still stirred. A secret he had never shared. Something about Operation Silence Flame. Something no one knew. Something dangerous. And as he closed his eyes, he whispered 3 words only he understood. They're still alive. James Carter had lived many lives. Soldier, ghost, stranger, hero. But there was still one more life he had to face. The one filled with secrets he had buried deep inside. That night, he couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy. The stars outside his window looked different, as if they were trying to tell him something. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding the old photo again. His unit, his brothers. 6 of them had died, or so he thought. But now, James wasn't sure anymore. Flashback, year 1984. The jungle was dark. Everything smelled like smoke and death. James was crawling through thick mud. His ears rang from an explosion. His hand was bleeding. He looked around. Marcus, he called out. No answer. Then, through the smoke, James saw something. 2 soldiers being taken away by masked men. Not enemies in uniform, but Americans. Something was wrong. James tried to move, but his body gave up. He fell unconscious. When he woke up in the village hospital days later, he was told everyone had died. No survivors. That's what the report said. But now, the memory felt clearer. Someone had been taken alive. Present day, Washington, D.C. Inside a cold, gray room, a group of intelligence officers sat around a screen. An image appeared. Old satellite photos. A hidden facility. deep in the jungle, long forgotten. Sir, one officer said, we've confirmed it. This was where Operation Silence Flame ended. But here's the problem. Someone's still transmitting from that location. The man in charge looked up sharply. Who? We don't know. But the signal has military encryption, old code. Only someone from Ghost Unit Bravo could know it. A long pause filled the room. You're saying? The officer whispered, someone from James Carter's team might be alive. Back in the town, James walked to the park early that morning. The grass was wet with dew. The bench was cold, but his mind was burning with questions. Had he been wrong for 41 years? Did one of his brothers survive? He pulled out a small box from his pocket. Inside was a broken piece of radio equipment, found on his body after the war. He turned it on. Nothing. But when he tapped a few buttons, a faint beep sounded. It was a signal. Old, weak, but real. James's heart raced. He remembered the old call code from Ghost Unit Bravo, a way to reach teammates without words, just beeps. Morse code. He tapped out a message. JC, alive. You? Nothing. Then, after a long pause, MT, alive. James dropped the box in shock. Marcus Taylor was still alive. 3 days later, James stood at the train station, holding a small duffel bag. He had contacted a man from the Pentagon, someone who still believed in the truth. I need a ride, James had said, back to where it ended. Now he was leaving the quiet town once more. David, the kind officer, had come to say goodbye. Where are you going? He asked. James looked him in the eye. To find the truth. David offered his hand. Be careful, sir. James shook it. Always am. Deep in the jungle, secret facility. The trees were taller than buildings. Vines wrapped around old structures. The air was thick. James stepped out of a helicopter, his cane in one hand, his eyes scanning every shadow. A younger soldier greeted him. We secured the area, sir. No signs of danger. But there's something you should see. They walked to a hidden bunker, half buried, covered in moss. Inside was a single room. Cold, dark, but the walls had carvings. Initials. Dates. MT. A. SK. The names of his unit. On the far wall, a message. Still here, still waiting. James stepped closer. He touched the wall with shaking hands. I knew it, he whispered. Then came a voice from the shadows. Rough, dry, familiar. You took your time, Carter. James turned, and there he was. Marcus Taylor, a little older, a little thinner, but alive. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Marcus stepped forward and hugged him. I thought you were dead, he said. So did I, James replied. Later that night, inside the bunker, James and Marcus sat beside a fire. Why didn't you try to contact me? James asked. I did, Marcus said. But someone didn't want me found. He handed James a box full of old files, maps, recordings. They kept me here. Said the mission failed. Said if I ever spoke, I'd risk war. I waited for years, alone. James looked at the files. Inside were records of the mission, the real orders, names of people in power who had ordered the cover-up. This could destroy everything, James said. Maybe it should, Marcus replied. The sun rose slowly over Washington, D.C., but in the shadows of tall government buildings, something bigger was rising, the truth. After 41 years of silence, the real story of Ghost Unit Bravo was about to be heard. James Carter and Marcus Taylor sat inside a secure room, across from two top military officials, and a man in a dark suit from the government. The files were on the table. The truth was written in every page, every photo, every lie. This can't go public, one official said. If people find out we abandoned our own soldiers. James didn't flinch. You already abandoned us once, he said. You won't silence us again. Marcus nodded. We didn't come for revenge. We came for justice. The man in the suit leaned forward. We can offer full recognition. Medals. A ceremony at the White House. Your story will be honored, but without the classified parts. James looked at him coldly. No more hiding. He pushed the file across the table. We're telling the truth. With or without you. A week later, national news. It began with a small story in an online military blog. The soldier who returned from the dead. But within 24 hours, it spread across every platform. CNN, BBC, Fox, YouTube, TikTok. Clips of James speaking in his calm, honest voice went viral. They said we were dead, but I survived, and so did the truth. Interviews, documents, hidden mission reports, video footage from the bunker. It was all there. Ghost Unit Bravo became the most searched name on the internet. Back in the town, David, the police officer who had once sat with James on the bench, watched the news with tears in his eyes. The mayor called a town meeting. Churches rang their bells. A mural was painted downtown with 7 faces, including Marcus, now confirmed alive. Officer Mike stood before the mural and placed his hand on his father's face. For years, I was proud of a story I didn't even know was true, he said softly. Now I know the full truth, and I'm even more proud. Meanwhile, across the nation, veterans from all over the country gathered in support. I served. I was forgotten too. James is not just one man's story. He's our story, said a retired Marine. Young people who had never cared for military stories before were now listening. School students read about James Carter in class. TikTok creators made short films reenacting the mission. One post went viral. They hid him. They forgot him. But he stood up, and now the world remembers. But not everyone was happy. Inside a dark office in Washington, a powerful senator slammed his fist on the desk. He had no right to go public. Those missions were sealed for a reason. An advisor whispered, "Sir, the people are on his side. I don't care. If Carter speaks again, I want every file he has destroyed." The advisor hesitated. "There's more, sir. He's being invited to speak at the United Nations." The senator froze. "This isn't just national anymore. It's global. At the Pentagon. Private meeting." An old general, once responsible for the mission's cover-up, requested to see James privately. James sat across from him, calm as always. "I came to say something," the general said. "I was wrong. We all were." James looked at him. "Why now?" The general sighed. "Because I don't want to die with this guilt. And because you did what I never had the courage to do, speak the truth." James stood to leave. "Then help me. Tell the public what you just told me." The general nodded. "I will." 1 month later, United Nations Assembly. James walked slowly to the podium. The room was full. Cameras pointed at him. World leaders listened. Marcus stood behind him, proud and silent. James began to speak. "My name is Sergeant James Carter. I was part of a team that didn't exist, until now. For 41 years, we were forgotten. Not just by a system, but by silence. Silence is a weapon. It kills slowly. But truth is a light. And even in the darkest jungle, light can find a way." The room stayed silent. Then a standing ovation erupted. Every nation stood. Every heart felt the weight of his words. Later that night, James sat alone again. This time, in a hotel room, not on a park bench. He looked out the window at the city lights. Marcus came in and handed him a letter. "It's from the president." James opened it. Inside was a message. "For your courage, your silence, your truth, we offer the highest civilian honor, the Medal of Freedom, not for what you did, but for what you stood for." James folded the letter and placed it beside the photo of his unit. "They're finally home," he said softly. Marcus nodded. "And so are you." Somewhere in a small town, a little boy walked with his father past the mural of James and his unit. "Daddy," the boy asked, "was he a superhero?" The father smiled. "No, son, he was something even better. He was a man who didn't give up." The wind was gentle. The sky was soft blue. The world felt quieter now. James Carter stood at the center of the National Cemetery. Rows of white headstones stretched far and wide, each one a story, each one a sacrifice. He wore his uniform again, pressed, clean, honored. On his chest now sat the Medal of Freedom, awarded by the president himself. But that wasn't the medal James cared most about. In his hand, he still held the photo. His unit, Ghost Unit Bravo. Marcus stood beside him, silent as always, a loyal brother, a survivor, a witness to the end. The ceremony. Crowds had gathered that morning. Not just soldiers, not just politicians, but people, everyday people, young and old, black and white, children, veterans, teachers, nurses, farmers. They came from cities and small towns, from deserts and coasts, all to say one thing: thank you. The government had finally agreed to do what James had asked for all those years ago. Today, a new monument would be unveiled. A statue of 7 soldiers, standing shoulder to shoulder, each name carved in stone. Each face based on the only photo James had carried through war, loneliness, and pain. The president took the stage. He spoke clearly, respectfully. Today, we honor a unit that was once erased from history. But today, they are written into the soul of this country, not just because they served, but because they waited, and still chose hope. The curtain dropped, and the statue stood proud. James Carter at the center, Marcus Taylor beside him, the others around them, immortalized in bronze. People clapped, some cried. A young soldier in the crowd saluted, and James finally smiled. After the ceremony, as people left, James stayed behind. He walked slowly to the statue, touched Marcus's bronze shoulder, then moved to the left side, where Samuel's likeness stood, then to Thomas, then to Eric. He whispered something to each one, a message only he knew. Marcus came over. "You okay?" James nodded. "They're not ghosts anymore." Flashback, final mission. There was one thing James had never told anyone. During the mission, when the jungle was burning and everything seemed lost, James had seen something. A small notebook Marcus had dropped. In that notebook was a list, not of enemies, but of dreams. Each soldier had written something they wanted to do when they got home. Samuel wanted to open a bookstore. Ian wanted to be a teacher. Thomas dreamed of a small farm. Eli wanted to write songs. Eric wanted to marry his high school love. Marcus had written, "Raise a family." And James had written, "Be remembered, not for what I did, but for who I was." That notebook burned in the fire, but the dream stayed in his heart. For 41 years. Now, as he stood before their names, he whispered, "I remembered." 1 month later, back in his hometown, James returned to the same town where nobody had noticed him. But now, the bench had his name on it. In honor of Sergeant James Carter, the man who waited, the man who spoke. Kids now asked to take photos with him. Schools invited him to speak. He didn't speak of guns or glory. He spoke of truth, of loyalty, of never forgetting. He always ended with the same line: "A soldier never dies as long as someone remembers him." His final days. James grew older, slower, but never weaker. He spent his mornings on the bench, his afternoons reading letters from all over the world, people who were inspired by him. A young girl from Kenya, a veteran from Brazil, a student from Korea, a single mom from Detroit. They all wrote one thing in different words: "Your story gave me hope." One morning, the sun rose as usual. The birds chirped softly. But James didn't get up from bed. Marcus came in, called his name. No response. James Carter had passed in his sleep. Peacefully. Quietly. With the photo still in his hand. The funeral. It was the biggest the town had ever seen. Soldiers from 5 countries attended. The president sent a letter. Veterans stood in rows, saluting silently. The town named a street after him. And on the back of the statue, these words were added: James Carter, 1940 to 2025. He waited in silence. He rose with truth. He gave the forgotten a voice. He lived with honor. He died remembered. A plane flew overhead and released 7 white ribbons. One for each member of Ghost Unit Bravo. The crowd looked up, then down, and saluted. 1 year later, a little boy visited the park with his grandmother. He pointed at the bench. Who was he? The old woman smiled. He was a soldier, but more than that, he was a man who told the truth when it was hard. Was he brave? She nodded. The bravest of all. The boy stared at the statue for a long time, then saluted.